All right. So, nope, didn't work. If you can hear me, clap again. If you can hear me, clap two times. Yeah. Okay, good. Now that we are all back together in one place, we are going to transition to our panel. Now, because at HCFA, we divide things up by gender sometimes. I'm going to introduce the men, and Gracie will introduce the women. So, wasn't my idea. We have Dawn and Brandon, two of our awesome ministry fellows. Yeah. And our ministry fellows. They're awesome, and they're on the panel.
Yes, indeed they are. On what would be your left is Teal. Give him a wave, yes. Teal McGarvey. And the lovely Jane as well. Yes. So Teal and Jane are our ministry fellows, and then if we can part the C's here so everyone can see. Our panel tonight is going to be moderated by two world-famous Harvard College and HCFA class of 2013ers. This is Corinne. Yes? Yes! This man should be excited. Yes. Yes, this man. And this is Ujunwa. So let's yeah. So we're really grateful for Uju and Corinne to come back and moderate this panel for us. And yeah, so we've been compiling questions, so the ministry fellows are going to take it away.
Test. There we go. Okay. Switches help. Relationships are kind of a big deal, and so we like to talk about them on a regular basis. And so what we had in mind tonight is to try to fast forward a bit for you. Now, for seniors, we're fast forwarding a couple of weeks, and you're out of here, and life changes, okay, in a couple of weeks. For some of you, it might seem like a long time from now, but you know what? Years go by pretty fast. And so we want to talk about what relationships look like long-term and the challenges there. Realistic expectations are so helpful in life. If you have a clue as to what's ahead and how to get there, thumbs up. If you don't have a clue, like when I was your age, man, it's twice as hard, maybe like 10 times as hard. So our hope is that we impart a little bit of wisdom here. Now, have we figured all this out? An emphatic no. No, we have not. I thought of the line blind leading the blind, but it's not quite that bad. It's more like the miracle story where I see people and they look like tree stumps. That's kind of where I think we, in terms of understanding relationships and whatnot. So here's how we're going to do this. We're going to take about 10 minutes to set the table for you. Each of us will just take a little turn, set the table, expectations, right? Looking forward. And then we're going to field your questions. About 20 questions we receive. We broke it into 4 categories. We're going to take one at a time. That's where Corinne and Uji are going to keep us on point, and they're going to get our face. They're going to get in our face if we don't move this along. So without further ado, Teal is going to start us off.
Okay, Okay. There we go. Hey guys. So I am the token single person on the panel. I felt like I would be the most relatable. So I'm going to talk twice as long. I'm just kidding. I'm not. But I have the least amount figured out. That's official. But one of the things I think is so amazing about if you know and walk with Jesus is that there is great purpose to wherever you find yourself in life. Now, you may not feel that purpose, right? Like Carl, what a reminder that we all walk through seasons where that are just really, really hard, right? But we do have a God who restores and who speaks into our relational situation, our work situation, our family situation, right? In ways that are so meaningful. So Paul, in his letter to the Corinthians, which is a challenge in a number of ways, especially if you happen to be a Corinthian, because they're getting their butts kicked. But one of the things he makes really clear is that wherever you find yourself, you're to be living a life that's leveraged for the kingdom. So if you find yourself single, right, that has particular strengths and opportunities. If you find yourself married, that's an amazing and beautiful picture of how God loves us if we know him and are part of his church, right? And how he loves us even if we don't know him, right? That there's a missional aspect to that. So all of that to say we are people of great longing, whether we're single or married, and that manifests itself in all kinds of different ways. But I think singleness is there's a particular publicness about our longing, right? And in that, I think an opportunity and also particular challenges, right? It's easier to be selfish in some ways when you're single. And yeah, is that a weird place to stop? I guess it is. Ellipsis, ... Shane.
I'll talk for just a minute about what it's like when you leave undergrad. For many of you, we're such privileged people, right? We knew that we would go to college, and so your life is kind of planned out for you on a certain level until you reach graduation day. And then there's this stunning thing that happens where you're like, my life isn't planned out anymore, and I am responsible for myself and decisions and relationships and on and on. And not only that, but you're extracted from familiar and community, and like at a place like Harvard, blockmates, you just all this built in, right, community, and you're just sent out there, thrown out there somewhere. You land, and you might find yourself in short order profoundly lonely. I think if there's one word that captures the general struggle in humankind, that loneliness is certainly a feature that everyone is familiar with. But when you leave this place, you're going to find yourself maybe particularly lonely because you've been accustomed to a lot of wonderful, probably relationships, community, ideally, and then you're just thrust out there. Anne Hathaway says that loneliness is my least favorite thing about life. The thing I'm most worried about is just being alone without anybody to care for or someone who will care for me. It's not just Anne Hathaway. Mother Teresa said, loneliness and the feeling of being unwanted is the most terrible poverty. And it is. And then Dag Hammarskjöld, and Swedes in here going, you just pronounced that really poorly. I don't know. If you're familiar with him, Secretary of General of the United Nations, someone that is remarkable person. He recorded in something of a diary called Markings his struggle, his angst, his loneliness as he was carrying a lot of responsibility at that time in his life. And fortunately, he reclaimed his faith, his Christian faith, and so that's captured in his musings. But I love this as he reflects on loneliness. Pray, and we're going to get to this in a minute, and we try to be positive here. Pray that your loneliness may spur you into finding something to live for, great enough to die for. And he also said, what makes loneliness and anguish is not that I have no one to share my burden, but this, I have only my own burden to bear. Now those are wise words, and I hope that we're able to move into some level of wisdom as we move on here in the next few minutes.
Do in the midst of loneliness. I think just two words, if you could leave with anything with what I'm saying, it would be initiative and intentionality. So as you recall, the New Testament, it's dominated by the Pauline epistles, and who does Paul write to? Right? He writes to cities. He writes to local churches. And so this is where the outworking of our faith works. This is, our own families and our communities where we are established. And so I liken it to maybe challenge you all to consider, as most of you probably won't stay in Boston or Cambridge, you could consider yourselves as kind of a transplant, right? Coming out of Cambridge in light of, if you think of organ transplants, there's this urgency. You kind of put the organ on ice for the sake of the organ itself, as well as for the body that awaits this new vital piece to function. And the reason is for the sustainability, right? The vitality of both, right? The member of the body as well as the body. And this is truly, I believe, how we ought to consider you all as you kind of think of moving on and moving forward, that it's to that extent of urgency that you need to get right, to the body where you belong, because the body can't survive without you, truly, each and every one of you. And so keep that in mind. So a practical thing, and then I think I can just close with that, is as you guys consider recruiting, possible locales, jobs, cities, that should be about the same time you're considering churches. So what are churches who have sound doctrine? You know, can I talk to Don or Nick or Teal about, and Brandon about, you know, the theology of a church? Can I email the pastors or the elders of a certain church? Do I know anybody in that city, maybe other Christians with whom I can connect? And so with the same intentionality that many of you put into recruiting, right, thinking of possible careers, can you put the same effort, right, the same intentionality, the initiative in searching for a local church? Because it's just that important, right? It's a matter of life and death.
I'm down. Am I good? You guys can hear me? All right. Yeah. I just add to that. I think one of the big things that we want you to come away with is to begin asking the question, how are you going to transition? You should be asking yourself, like, how am I going to transition to that next phase of life? And specifically thinking, like, as you go from Harvard to a Fortune 500 company, or you go to Harvard to a business firm, or whatever you do, one thing that is true is things are going to be way different. And so the question is, how are you going to seek and serve your God in those places where you're going to be? And so you should be thinking, like, what does that look like outside of this place? And so, like Jane said, thinking about the church. But in addition to that, you should also be thinking about what does it look like to live as a Christian on your job and things like that. And so what does it look like when you're working in a workforce that's very competitive, that's highly demanding? What does it look like to spend time with God? What does it look like to cultivate relationships with people who are not your blocking mates, where you have to, instead of being able to go a few apartments down in the complex, you have to go across town to get together with them? And so what does it look like to cultivate community in that way? And I guess if we move past platonic relationships, what does it look like to cultivate dating relationships in a church setting? And what are some things you need to really consider as you think about finding a mate? And many other questions like that. What does it mean? How do you stay pure? All those kind of things like that. These are questions you should be thinking about. And these are some of the questions we're going to try to answer now and give you at least some wisdom. The hope is obviously knowing that we can't answer all the questions now, but I hope that this will be something that will just continue on in the dining halls, at the HCFA office, with your ministry fellows, and with one another, thinking about how do we do this stuff and do it well in a way that honors the Lord. And so those are some of the things we want you to really start wrestling with if you're not already.
Great. What a stellar panel. We didn't have to get in anyone's faces as much as we wanted to. So we're just going to dive right in with the questions. There's 4 different sections that we'll be addressing here. The first topic is work-life balance. Second, we'll be talking about porn and masturbation, otherwise known as idolatry. Third, we'll be talking about divorce. And then lastly, the how and when of marriage. So let's just get started. Work-life balance. What is appropriate as far as work hours, recreation hours, time devoted to service, etc.? If necessary, should we devote our time to a second job if it will make finances a bit better in the short term?
I get to launch here. This is so involved, and the idols are Calvin talked about our hearts being idol factories. That really is the heart of the issue, I think, when we think of balancing life and striking a balance. It's incredibly challenging. When we think of loneliness, say you're out there and you're lonely, what happens? We might get a little desperate and try to force things. We might enter into a relationship we otherwise would not, because we're needy in that way. One of the things that, I'm just to mention this quickly before I address the questions a little more directly. For me, the chief idol, it's a little embarrassing to admit it, but the chief idol for me that I discovered later on was this relationship, the relationship, right? I wanted to find this perfect woman who would be, get married, and that would just be the thing that really offered the most fulfillment in my life. That was the highest. Above my vocational pursuits, all of that. That was, I later discovered, an idol. So how did that play out? Well, it made me a mess in my dating relationships, in my pursuit of it. I was just dysfunctional. We might not have time for this, but especially for guys, we might do a part 2 sometime of how to not be stupid in relationships. I'm the poster boy for that. I just did a lot of stupid things. And a lot of that was because I just didn't have my priorities quite in order, and no one was telling me how to do this. I was trying to figure out all by myself. No one told me how to balance being married and having a family and being in vocational ministry. Nobody warned me how challenging that would be. And it's been really quite challenging. And I really feel like in the portion when I was a pastor before coming here, that there was imbalance. So it's easy to understand, right? I mean, look at the work that I was called to do was endless. There was always more to do and more needs, and you'll feel that in the jobs that you're pursuing. Many of you are going into some pretty high-speed, high-pressure kinds of environments with a bunch of type A personalities running around, running the show, and they're going to expect you to give them a left arm, your leg. I mean, they're going to ask for your entire life sometimes. So how do you balance this, not lose your soul in the midst of these pursuits? So what's another idol? Some achievement, climb the ladder thing, right? Make a name for myself, be famous, whatever we want to do, make a lot of money. I mean, there's a lot of idols out there that we could fall prey to, and guess what idolatry does? Carl, you just said a line. I jotted it down. I hope you said that what you're struggling with is destroying your humanity. You know what idols do? And I have firsthand experience. They destroy your humanity, and they gut your relationships. They take you away from your relationship with God and relationship with other people. So first, the way I would say just is no real specific answer here to striking the balance would be seek God first and learn what it means to love people. So when you're loving people in your church and you're loving your family, those are equal needs and opportunities. Just because it's in a church building and it's ministry doesn't elevate it. That was my mistake. Elevate it somehow into the needs of your immediate family. These people are depending on you. I'll stop with that. Teal's going to pick up.
Yeah, I'm probably not the best person to be answering this question, but because I'm in process, I think, with the question of what does it look like? Because what happened to me is I left college and I worked in a sort of typical office business kind of setting. And all of a sudden I was like, this is so boring. My life is so lame, right? and I mean, all I did was like get up and eat breakfast and go to the office and then go home to where my roommate was and then watch TV or something. I mean, it was just like not exciting. And even the prospect of like going out or like the social piece, it was such a step away from what I had experienced in college that it was just completely jarring. And so I say that without a whole lot by way of solution, other than to suggest that might be coming your way. And I think, sorry, I'm kind of a realist. But but I do think this concept of human flourishing, the idea that we are people with bodies, right, and souls, and we have more. Your boss is not going to feel particularly responsible for your spiritual life. Your boss is not going to feel particularly responsible for your health in any area other than whether or not you're coming to work and doing a good job, unless you have a boss like Don. But you probably won't. So my sense, my sort of challenge would be to just go in with an awareness of your own needs and health, and kind of doing the hard work of taking the initiative and assessing, kind of looking regularly and deeply at your own life and being willing to adjust, right? That first year is especially hard, right? And the opportunities are there for adjustment.
Tag one thing. If you get married, and certainly not everyone here will, but if you do, one of the values of having a spouse is that they can call you out on things whenever they want. And it's annoying, but it's extremely helpful. And if your spouse is saying, I think your life is unbalanced, then it's a good idea to probably take that seriously and then, adjust it. One of the benefits, say you're not going to get married, if you're in close community with people, let people, accountability, right? Let people speak into your life. Let them in. Let them know what your struggles are. Let them, invite them sometimes, say, what's your critique of me? If you ever dared to do that, like, say, what do you think about me and wish you could fix, but you would never dare say to my face? I mean, that's kind of why not ask that question, right? If they're thinking it, I need to probably hear it. So anyway, I'll finish with that. Are we out of time for this section? Get in my face next time. It'll be fun.
Sorry. So we just began the conversation on work-life balance. To be continued, we're going to read some of the questions that you guys submitted about porn and masturbation. The first one was, does watching pornography count as committing adultery? Can I divorce my spouse over watching pornography or reading erotica?
Is masturbating a sin if it keeps me from committing adultery or fornication?
I'll speak to the second part of the question. I'm gonna give, All right. So the question is, does watching pornography count as? No, not that one. No, there was a question about. I think the question is if. What's the second question? 19. Okay. Is masturbating a sin if it keeps me from committing adultery? Now, when I read that question, at first, if you think about the question, it assumes something. It assumes that masturbating is the best means, like, as if, I'll just put it this way. It starts from the premise that you can't, it's almost starting from the premise that you cannot be pure apart from some sort of sexual expression. And so it's starting from this place that being chaste, that's not, like, that masturbation is the only means through which you can be chaste and actually be pure. And so that I would challenge just the way the question is formed in that way, and in saying that I think that the scriptures talk about there are a variety of ways. Well, there's at least another way that we can be chaste and not given. Let me read the question just so I answer this right. The only way to keep you from masturbating or fornication is from adultery. And I would say that that's not, I think we're starting from a bad place if we start from there, because we can be chaste through various things like the scriptures talk about. For example, you read a passage like in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 where it talks about that, first of all, Jesus was not married, Paul is not married, and both of them were able to be, not to necessarily succumb in these, well, I can't speak for Paul's whole life, but what I'm getting at is, is I think we start from a faulty premise if you believe, so some people do believe this, and maybe I'll just say it this way. Some people do believe that there's no way to not have any kind of sexual expression. That the idea, and especially in our culture, we feel like I think the way it's taught is like you got to be having some sort of sex. Either you're with a girl or you're with a guy or whatever you're doing, or you're by yourself and you're watching porn or you're doing something like that. But I would push back at that and say no, it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. That there are many people who are pure, and are chaste and are pure apart from that. And so I would push back against that and say that there's a sense in which the scriptures promise that Jesus has given us a provision that we can, like that there is no temptation that has seized us except what is common to man, and that there's a provision that God provides a way of escape for us in that situation. And so I'll push back against it in that way. Is there anything else you guys want to add while I collect my thoughts?
Covered pretty extensively in the actual Sex and Spirituality manual that Nick wrote. But some helpful passages that we tend to kind of refer to when it comes to pornography in particular, and then masturbation as well, would be the idea of Job, right? That he made a covenant with his eyes, that there's a promise making, right? Especially in light of the promises and the intentionality that God had for sex within the context of marriage. Right. And in addition to that would be, Jesus's teaching based on that it's not just the act of adultery or sex outside of marriage that is adultery, but actually looking at another woman lustfully, right? So Christianity, right, always goes back to the heart's motivation, and that is both a helpful thing, but also a harder thing, right? To give you kind of, at times, kind of a black and white type of a, definition or direction. But even in one's, what's going on in one's heart versus even one's kind of outward manifestation, that still can be sin, right? So just some helpful verses just to kind of supplement what Brandon was saying.
One thing I'd add to that is this. The Bible, I think if you're looking for a concrete one passage that says self-stimulation, sexual self-stimulation is prohibited, you won't find one. But I think when we talk about what the purpose is of marriage and sex, I think I can give you plenty of reasons why I think masturbation is not good, and you should abstain from it. And one I would say is, for one, when we talk about the meaning of sex, sex is meant to be social. Meaning it's meant to be done with it's meant to be relational. It's meant to be done with another person. It's the consummation, what we're talking about, of this marriage thing, where the two people who are separate are becoming one. They're being united, right? And so, but when we talk about masturbation, it's very self-centered. It's me getting pleasure. It's not relational at all. It's another thing I'd add to it is it tends to be, like I said, it's very self-focused, but also there's a couple other things I was going to say about this. I'll just say just the selfishness part of it, just in that it tends to, what else I can add? For example, I'd say it also tends to isolate. It also is another reason I would add. You guys have anything to add while I think about this?
So we are sexual beings, right? And God made us that way. So that is an awesome thing. And it's awesome even when when we're not sure what to do with it, right? So whether most of us here are not married, with the exception of people sitting up here, and so thinking about sexuality, right? The world would say, this is an insane conversation you guys are having, right? Like why is this even being discussed? Which is a fair point, right? The only way that this is even a compelling vision at all is to think we have a creator. Oh gosh, that scared me actually. That we have a creator who has designed us in such a way that we have a sexuality, right? That sexuality is not just about whether or not we're having sex, but that we are gendered beings who do things in our bodies, right? And so we have friendships in and through our bodies, right? We experience creativity. A lot of people would say that that's very tied to sexuality, right? So there are all these other things. So if we start thinking like, what can I do? What can I get away with? I think we've already sort of missed the mark, which is God's amazing design and the opportunity we have to think about something that we've each been given and find out how we can honor God with it, right, in the place where we find ourselves. So I think thinking about masturbation, maybe the question to be asking is, what's underneath of that? And probably it's a lot of loneliness, right, and isolation, but also good desire. So inviting God into that affirmation of our desire, right, while not engaging in a behavior that further isolates us, right? So I think kind of the bigger questions, rather than just, is this a sin? Should I check that box or not? And then the defeatism, that cycle is just not necessarily helpful, nor is it, I think, honoring to the design.
Did you want to add something, Brandon?
I think also I would say, like, for example, when we talk about sex, another thing about Christian marriage and sex within marriage is the idea that we bring our ethic of self-giving love, like, into the bedroom. And so even the idea of when we talk about sex, there's a sense in which when we talk about it having a big component of it being actually serving your spouse. But when we contrast that with masturbation, what is it? Serving yourself. When you think about a marriage relationship, and I'll just say this for guys, like, I think there is a sense in which, this is maybe unrelated, but there's a sense in which also, like, some guys think as soon as I get married, it's just gonna be sex all day, every day, like, right? And but in reality, like, that's not necessarily how it works out. Like, in reality, surprise. But in reality, like, what happens? part of the marriage thing being a relational thing is also the fact that you married another person. And, like, in marrying that person has emotions, they have feelings, they get tired, they get discouraged, they have all kind of things like that, which make it so that you have to cater to that person. And sometimes that means, and so one of the things I tell guys is you have to cultivate self-control. Like, whether you're planning on getting married or not, you need to cultivate self-control, because you're going to get married, and it's not just going to be a free-for-all all the time. Like, and I think one of the things that masturbation does is you only serve yourself, you isolate yourself, you don't think about serving anyone else. It's like Burger King. You get it when you want it, how you like it. And so, yeah, there's more I could say about this. I'd love to continue this conversation, but we got to move on. So.
We're going to field some of your questions on divorce. From a biblical perspective, why can't I get a divorce from someone who is faithful to me sexually, but abused me or my children physically or psychologically?
From a biblical perspective, do I have the right to divorce my spouse for abandonment or neglect?
We read this question already, but it's related. Does watching pornography count as committing adultery? Can I divorce my spouse over watching pornography or reading erotica?
Well, tough questions. And, and those questions were written by people where, not just in a vacuum, right? There's a reason that they wrote those questions. And I don't even want to know all the reasons why, where some of those questions are coming from. When you are close in a community, a church community, those kinds of questions will be relevant to everyone. Those kinds of questions will be raised by your best friend. Those kind of questions will be, you'll sense something's wrong, you'll see struggle and pain, and you'll be like, oh my goodness, there's something going on. And we're in positions often, people will share things with us that we'll wish we never had heard, but the reality of just deep struggle, abuse sometimes, that kind of thing. Let me start by not answering those specific questions right at the top, but to just look in general at, again, the bigger vision. Why does God hate divorce? I mean, that's just a great question for us to ask and to keep in our minds, especially if we're thinking of getting married and thinking of making that kind of covenant promise. God hates divorce because he values covenant promises. And there's an old movement, it's some years ago, a bunch of men called promise keepers, really well named. When we enter into a covenant relationship and make a promise with another human being, God takes that so seriously, and so should we. In other words, we're like, I'm serious about this. This is till death do us part. I heard a recent stat, just a general survey. They take them all the time. 50% of marrieds now go into marriage thinking that might get divorced. I mean, that's a pretty that's a real possibility. And why wouldn't we think that in light of the stats and just the carnage that we see all around us? When it comes to abuse, let me say this, and this is to underscore what James is talking about, the value of getting into a community and being known, knowing others and being known within a church community, and just kind of walking through life with other people, ideally a smaller group of people that you're close with and that really know your story. Here's the value. If you're a woman and you're in a relationship and it's going bad and there's abuse there, guess what? That close circle of women in your life are going to pick up on it. And you might feel safe, and this is a classic problem. Women, like, I'm afraid to tell anybody for fear of what could happen to them or to their children. So you're in a community, there's a safe place to take struggle like that. And guess what? The church is then responsible, and the leader is responsible there for helping to take care of business. And it might go, so you turn to your authority structures if necessary, church discipline, right? You call people out on sin. You remove people that are in danger, and you give them a safe place to be from a dangerous situation. So the temptation would be a quick exit, flee, divorce. But because God values these commitments so much, because as Christians, this is why you should marry Christian too, if you're a believer, because we have the capacity to forgive and to forgive and to forgive and to invest, and because we have the resources in Christ to see change in some impossible situations, then we try to work it from a redemptive angle instead of just quickly bailing, which might seem wise even or smart or just obvious, but in reality, there might be some deeper, longer-term, amazing things that could come from this. I'm going to take you too much time, but did you want to tag on? Too?
So we're moving on to the next section, which is the how and when of marriage. So we'll be addressing wisdom in regards to mate selection, commitment, and community. The first question: what are the implications of the Christ church metaphor for husbands and wives? What are some real-life examples of how this ideal for marriage is carried out?
What is the hardest aspect of marriage? Why is that fun?
Putting the seat down.
Only for you, Alistair. How should we go about discerning God's will with regard to relationships and marriage, as well as more generally?
How do you know it's time to propose to your girlfriend?
Is it wiser to wait until after grad school to get married, even if you have dated all throughout undergrad?
How long should an engagement be?
There's only one more. How can I reconcile honoring my father and mother if I am marrying someone they do not approve of? For example, interracial relationships.
Can I give a little, I didn't say this before, but I just want to give a little preface about some of these answers that we're going to give. One thing you should know is a lot of these questions are covering gray areas in the Bible. And so they're questions that are not directly addressed. And so when we get to that place, you have to recognize that there is room for diversity of opinions on some of these things. And we may have, we don't know, but we may have different opinions on some of these things. And so, we know. But I think it's important for you to know that sometimes good, solid, faithful Christians can sometimes have good reasons for thinking differently on some of these things. And so it's just important for you to know that as we're talking about some of these things, we're giving you our biblically informed wisdom a lot of times. And I think people will probably reference different things when they're talking more on the biblical level. Is that fair, guys? Okay, cool. So which question do we want to tackle first? Okay.
Last time, which I didn't mean to do, but I'll just start off with a simple one. It's both just practical, but the question of engagement, I think it was length of engagement, is that correct? So I would say just one factor to keep in mind, let's see, I think you have to think in terms of need of logistical preparation, right, as well as just who, in terms of the couple, how comfortable are you with the ambiguity, right? Because engagement is a funny stage in that you kind of look like you're married, but you're not, so you cannot claim the benefits of marriage, right? And so there's still boundaries, but it gets fuzzy. So I recommend kind of a short engagement, right, for those reasons, for that ambiguity. Temptation, to stay away from that type of temptation as well. And then there are practical things that if, ladies, you ever have questions about just how long it takes a dress to be altered, to get a venue down, I would advise, I think like a year, honestly, is probably like the longest that it ought to be, if possible. The shortest, maybe like 4 months in terms of just like dress alterations, venue, and also family relationships with your future in-laws. If it's kind of scattered and everyone has their opinion and wants their piece of the cake and the pie, that might be something to also kind of figure and tailor, right? So you want to cut it a little bit shorter so that people don't have the space to continue to contribute, right? So, okay, so that was, but yeah.
If it's dramatic, cut it, make it more dramatic, right?
Put some limitations around it, right? If your future in-laws or your own parents just really want to say in it, right? And if you only have a certain amount of time, you can kind of be a little bit more, right? Straightforward and concrete. So anyhow, just a really practical question. I think just keep in mind the temptation, the ambiguity, and each person is different. But I really think ideally like no more than a year would be the way of wisdom. You want to take anything, Brendan?
But I will speak about what role attraction, one of my guys in my Bible course brought this up the other night. What role should attraction play in a relationship? And you guys may have different takes on this. I actually probably believe that some of the ladies may have a different take than the guys because we may look at this a little bit differently. First thing I'll say is when it comes to attraction, that means different things to different people. I think for a lot of guys, it means how does she look? But I think it's just true. I'm generalizing, but you get what I'm saying. I think there are other factors that, and there's other things. But let me just say this. I think that attraction, and feel free to disagree with me, guys. Please do, if you do. I think attraction should be a consideration, but it's not ultimate. And so there's a sense in which I don't think it should be a non-factor in that, and for a variety of reasons. For one, I'll just give you a quick one because we don't have much time, is like one, marriage is difficult. Like just to be completely honest, marriage is difficult there in general. Like, and to me, this is gonna sound stupid, but there's a sense in which, in my opinion, I feel like why make it harder on myself? Like, like if all things being equal, like all things being equal, like sorry. A couple things. All things being equal, I think if there's someone there who you're attracted to, and they're of good character, they're a Christian person, they're a person who fears the Lord, and then there's another person that you're less attracted to, and they fear the Lord. Why would you take like that doesn't make sense to me. I mean, but that's obvious, I guess, to you based on your laughing. But that being said. I'll say this. I would say that for many guys, I think we can exalt the physical attraction to a place it shouldn't be, and it can become ultimate, and it become an idol, or it's like there's a lot of really good Christian women around you who have great characters, who love God, who are good, and to you maybe even good enough. But you can have that mentality where if she's not hitting on every cylinder, if she's not a 10 in my book, then no, I'm not going to do it. And I think that can be wrong and foolish, and you can miss on a lot of good, godly people around you. And remember, keep in your mind that the idea with Proverbs 31, what does it say? That charm is deceptive, beauty is fleeting. To be honest, like, and just to be real with you, looks won't sustain your marriage. So as you think about that long term, like your wife may be really beautiful, she may not always be, but it won't sustain your marriage long term. What I mean by that is you don't know what's going to happen. I don't mean that she is beautiful. I should stop. She told me, just keep going. Just let's be concise.
2 minutes.
Okay, question of readiness for marriage, I think. And I think of these same questions when students ask me about that guy, right, in HCFA, right, usually. Okay, so these are the factors that I go through my head and I ask them to think about, right? And for questions of readiness for marriage as well, of course. But I think the first is for both of the individuals and in the couple, is there a sense of a desire for community, right? It goes back to exactly what we had first introduced. That I think that is essential to our faith, right? Our faith is in community. It's a corporate faith. And so is that desire there, that willingness, that initiative? Second, the category of teachability. So there might be 3 points under that particular area of teachability. Is that are the individuals in this couple willing to seek counsel from more mature Christians, right? Others in their community. The second point under teachability, I think, would be check out how your potential partner relates to people of the opposite gender, right? Does that guy kind of hang out with girls a little bit too much, right? In kind of an emotional, reliable, in a I guess emotional reliant way. In that way, I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but yeah, just check. Do they have healthy relationships between, with their own friends within their own gender? I think that probably is the more important question, right? Does that guy have a lot of good guy friends? Accountability, do they understand that with one another? And does that girl also have a good number of girlfriends, or does she just hang out with guys all the time? So I think that's an important balance question, which has greater implications, really, really does, if you venture into marriage and what that might look like in terms of who is the primary emotional partner. Yeah. I think the third point, within teachability is there a willingness to grow in the understanding of the meaning of marriage? I think we've been kind of pounding the idea of narrative. Like, do you have a narrative for marriage and the purpose behind it? So you can do things like, yes, read books by Tim Keller, The Meaning of Marriage, which we pass around quite frequently. Are you willing to learn and understand the reason behind these things? I think the last, which is actually really important, is can you leave and cleave, right? Your parental figures and live a life that characterizes that emotionally as well as financially as well. So I think those are some kind of crucial questions. And then something I didn't write in my notes would also be Paul's exhortation to, if you are, burning with desire, right, that you should consider marriage. And I think that is also, sometimes we can kind of chuckle at that, but I think that is seriously something to consider, that is one of the factors that you ought to keep in mind as you consider timing of marriage and moving forward.
And so I think our panelists' desire is to give you guys some starting points to think about and to continue in community and fellowship to discuss and to continue turning to Scripture to check your consideration of these things. So we'll end the conversation for now, obviously to be continued in community, and let's give our panelists a big thank you.